Sup folks?
My children, I've brought the milk back from my 5-year trip to the shop!
Huh? What the hell was even that? I guess part 5 is on. Chapter 28, Buying Stuff is for Noobs. Aizawa and Yamada sat opposite Izuku in their kitchen, the teen looking more than a bit nervous. He could understand. No teenager wants to be told that their guardians need to have a talk with them. School had just ended for the day and they'd brought this up as soon as they'd gotten inside, mostly because they wouldn't have too much time before they would need to pick Eri up. And any serious conversation was much more difficult when a curious child was in the house and inevitably would want to be involved. Plus, Melissa probably wouldn't be over until the weekend. She'd been officially transferred to UA a week earlier and lived on campus with other students that had special circumstances. But for at least the moment, they had the house to just, the three of them, and the cats. Am I in trouble? Those puppy dog eyes were powerful, but he knew they had to stay strong and be firm or else he'd think there weren't consequences to his actions. Yes. At the same time Hisashi said the opposite. Of course not, little listener. He turned and glared at his husband. I'm sorry. He's just so sweet, I can't handle it when he gives me those sad eyes. I'm confused. Did I do something wrong or not? I suppose that depends on how you answer some questions. The first thing is it looks like you've been using your quirks without permission to try and get out of trouble. We've found signs of you using overhaul or other quirks to hide when you've broken something. He pulled out a few pictures where slight inconsistencies were found around the house. A plate that was in perfect condition rather than being worn down like the others in the set. A cabinet where the wood grain was on the inside. And the most significant, roughly half a wall that was off color and was missing a crack that was previously there, hidden behind a picture. What's so wrong about fixing a few things around the house? I did my best to put things back just like they were. But colors are really hard to recreate. Hisashi took over, knowing his wonderful idiot of a partner was falling back on investigation methods and unintentionally talking to their kid like a suspect instead of a child. And that's totally fine, kiddo. You know we don't have a problem with you using your quirks around the house as long as you're responsible about it. The problem is you tried to hide it from us. If something happens we need to know what's going on, otherwise we can't help. Can you tell me why you had to fix those things? He looked down, an embarrassed blush on his cheeks. Well, a few things I broke on accident because I'm really not used to how strong I've gotten recently. With physical prime, even without a quirk active I've become way stronger really fast, and, sometimes I forget that happened. Like, I had tried to open the cabinet but then ripped it in half instead. And for the wall, I'd been practicing switching between quirks I had active, and then I sneezed with resonate active and the wall kinda exploded. After he finished his mumble-jumble he looked up at them with big nervous eyes that were on the verge of tears. That's alright, listener. I've done that a couple times myself, one strong sneeze and there go the windows. You won't get in trouble for accidents, just tell us next time so we don't have to guess at what's going on? He nodded. Great. Is there anything else we should know about? No? Nothing I can think of at least. Aizawa looked at him with a fair amount of intensity. You're positive? Nothing you might have done, purposefully or accidentally you'd like to share? Yes. I'm confused. Where are you going with this? Well, I had an interesting conversation with Power Loader this morning about some of his tools. You see, some of his tools have been going missing lately. Izuku's eyes widened and his face rapidly went pale as Aizawa pulled out a list. Specifically, he was looking for a few dozen schematics, a few hundred pounds of high-quality alloys, a machine for making cloth with DNA spliced into it, an air composition test, entire toolboxes worth of more general equipment, and quite a bit of liquid nitrogen. The list was folded up and put back in his pocket. So when he got a brand new state-of-the-art air compressor, he decided to put a tracker on it just in case. Would you like to take a guess at where it led him? Izuku nervously shook his head, as if that would make the issue go away. No? That's surprising, since it was in your room with half a dozen other tools and gadgets that definitely aren't yours. You had about half of that list in your room, and I'm guessing the rest is stashed somewhere else. President Mick gave him a soft smile. I know it might feel like the end of the world, but this really isn't a huge deal. We expected there to be a bit of transition from living with villains to living with heroes, and one of those things is no stealing. Honestly, we're shocked it took this long for you to break rules. All you have to do is return everything to the original owners and apologize. He just shifted uncomfortably in his seat and shook his head. Problem child, this really doesn't have to be difficult. And if, for whatever reason, it really is that important that you have an air compressor and a block of titanium, then we can make that happen. But we're returning what you stole whether you like it or not. Aizawa reached into a bag that Izuku had previously not paid attention to and pulled out a couple of tools that had Power Loader's name on them, probably to reduce theft. He also grabbed a strange glass container that glowed purple. He didn't know what it was, but it probably wasn't Izuku's. We can go over right now before he got to finish. Izuku's hand shot out and snatched it away. He lifted his shirt and pressed it to his stomach, turning the item into a tattoo with skin deep, preventing them from taking it back. It's mine. With another flash of movement, he teleported behind them and took the bag of contraband, hiding it behind his back before his eyes went foggy and he teleported again. The foggy eyes meant he activated bird's eye view, so he could have gone literally anywhere. Luckily, he was back after just a few seconds, without any of the items. The two heroes looked at each other in confusion. I don't want to be mean, kiddo, but from what I understand, those aren't yours. But if I've got something wrong then feel free to correct me. Izuku's face was scrunched up in confusion, like he didn't know either. I'm sorry, I can't think of a logical reason for why these are mine, but they are, and the idea of you taking them makes me really upset and angry. I don't know what's wrong with me. Why do I feel so sure that these are mine? Whoa there, kiddo, take a breath. It seems like your thoughts and feelings are a bit out of sorts. So, the tools feel like they're yours. Can you try telling me why? Not with logic, just tell me your gut feeling on why it's yours. He closed his eyes in concentration, the words coming out in a jumbled ramble. Because I needed them for a project I want to do. It's a surprise I've been working on. So I took them, and since I took them they're mine now and I won't let you take them because they're mine. Yamada looked over his shoulder at Aizawa, who had a slight frown but actually looked more relieved after that answer. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? I'm not a mind reader so I don't know. But if you think that this is a quirk side effect, then yeah, I agree. Yeah, I need to go pick up Eri, but don't let me stop you two from continuing this conversation. Aizawa just sighed and turned back to Izuku as his husband left. Can you explain why you didn't just ask for what you wanted? The school would likely have provided them to you for this project, even if you wanted to keep this project to yourself until it was done. Borrowing them just feels wrong. I don't want to give them back. And if they give them to me just to be nice, that means they can be taken when they don't feel nice. So I took them. He nodded slowly. I think I understand a bit better. It's the lack of control and permanence that triggers that reaction. Would it be better if it was an exchange? From what you've said in the past, your father gave you quirks as either prizes in a game or trades, so I'm assuming he has the same impulses. He gave a brief nod. Okay, we can work with that. I think the first thing we'll need is a list of everything you stole. I won't push for where they are, but I need to at least know what the items are, that way we can figure out a better option than just taking it. Izuku just looked to the side awkwardly in response. Well, how do you define stole? What if no one wanted it anymore? Aizawa felt like he was going to go gray mid-conversation. Stop trying to use technicalities. What exactly did you take, and where did you get it? You know how you had me do some cleanup at that trash-covered beach to build muscle, but we never finished because I was busy committing crime as a vigilante? Yes. I recall. Are you saying you just took some trash? Weird, but not a problem. Why do you look so nervous? What aren't you sharing? I sort of took all of it, and a few other trash heaps as well. Overall, I think I took a few thousand tons of raw material after using overhaul to alter it into a more useful form. He took in a deep breath and rubbed his temples. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You've been taking various tools and materials, some from the school, some from trash piles, all to create an unknown project along with what is sounding like a lair of some sorts to hold the things you've claimed as yours. Yeah. That's about right. I won't push on where the space is, since that seems important to you. But we really do need those things back. Some of it was very expensive equipment, so here's my offer. I'll buy some tools and trade them with you so we can give Power Loader his stuff. He's very attached to his tool set, so he'll want the originals back. For the more specialized stuff, figure out how long you'll need it for this project of yours and I'm sure we can make an arrangement that won't set off those impulses. Short term, we can stick with trading, long term you'll need to get a handle on that, but that's a problem for later. Izuku just nodded, feeling more than a bit embarrassed about the entire situation. Everyone had helped where they could, but it seemed like each thing was just a stopgap for his growing need to take everything he could. Chapter 29, the chapter where Izuku just rambles about quirks and support gear. Aizawa gave a deep sigh as he stood at his podium. He looked at his class and could already tell it was going to be an exhausting day. How could he tell? Because Midoriya was with him when they both made their way to the school, and yet he wasn't in his seat. They'd both left earlier than usual. He had to get some paperwork done and Izuku mentioned something about finishing up a piece of support gear. But the green-haired boy isn't one to be late to class unless he's causing chaos, so he felt his concerns were justified. After a few minutes of silence, Ida stood up while raising his hand. Sir. Is there a reason we haven't begun our homeroom yet? Yes. The reason is that I have a feeling that we'll be interrupted and I don't feel like starting a class that will get taken over by something else. Right now we're just waiting for something unexpected and probably alarming to happen. They didn't have to wait long though. A few seconds later Izuku kicked open the door and ran up to Uraraka's desk. He was practically vibrating in excitement as he slammed down a box in front of her. I made you new shoes and a jetpack? He pauses for a moment. Well, I didn't make the jetpack, my sort of maybe half-sister made it, but it's still for you. While most of the class looked bewildered, Uraraka just gave him a big smile, far more used to his antics and having already met Melissa a few times. That's so cool. Let me see. She opened up the box and pulled out a pair of pink boots and looked them over. They were the same light pink as her hero outfit, but they looked far more like the boots you would see on an astronaut. An extra detail on the side was a multicolored M that she assumed was a logo of some sort. The boots they gave you were awful. They were so bulky and there was no reason to add a heel. And they didn't even match your space aesthetic. So I made you better boots. Not only are they better boots, but they do something special. He took one back for a moment and threw it at the ground with a fair amount of force. The solid-looking shoe hit the floor but made almost no sound and showed no sign of damage. They are shock-absorbent and can handle thousands of force without issue. Whoa. That's amazing. How's that even possible? Oh, it's not that tricky. I can make quirked items by having certain mutations active, like shock absorption, and then make items with emitters that create items from my body. I used nail gun to make a pile of shock absorption nails, and then use that metal to make the bottom of your boots. She giggled in response. Oh yeah, very straightforward. Just then, the door was slammed open again. This time the one coming through was a pink-haired girl pushing a seemingly empty cart. Am I late? I brought the invisible swords. In Mai's excitement she ran into the room with enough speed that the cart nearly tipped over, which would have been very problematic based on what it was supposedly carrying. At the last moment Melissa came up from behind her and grabbed onto it, stabilizing it and preventing disaster. Aizawa gave a sound of true exasperation. Yeah, that fit within what he'd expect. And why do you have invisible swords? They're for Hagakure. Well, it's not just swords though. I was worried about her not having a hero costume protecting her, so I made her an invisible outfit with a little bit of shock absorption. It's not nearly as tough as the boots, but the absorbent silk can still take a hit from with a sledgehammer without issue. We could have made it stronger than that, but that would have meant making the fabric much thicker and limited her mobility, which is counter to your fighting style. We also included a black light, since that makes the suit glow, because it's not as a complete form of invisibility as your quirk, but in this case that's good because it means you can see it when you put it on but still have it be invisible otherwise. Oh, but keep that a secret because that means black lights could be a serious weakness where people can see your outfit, making you vulnerable in a fight. And that was all we planned to do, but then we had a lot of fun making invisible things, and since we didn't know what weapons you wanted to use we goofed off and made a lot of invisible weapons because we could. It was almost impressive to see just how much Izuku could say without taking a single breath when he got excited about something. Aizawa sighed again and started to think that he was sighing enough it would replace regular breathing. He quietly watched as Hagakure excitedly looked over the new outfit and didn't care enough to stop her when she sprinted out of the room to go try it on. Aizawa had mostly just accepted that there wouldn't be a homeroom class that day. Izuku blinked out of the room and then teleported back right next to Kirishima, holding out a deep red cape that matched Kirishima's hair. I know you care a lot about chivalry and manliness and protecting people, so I made this for you. It has shock absorption and is 100% fireproof. It will help keep you safe from sneak attacks, but its main purpose is that you can use it to protect the people you're rescuing. Oh, and since we could make it way thicker than Hagakure's outfit, it's able to stand up to getting hit by a single All Might smash, which is probably way more than you need, but it seemed better to have too much than too little protection. There was a big toothy grin in response as he put it on and immediately twirled a bit. This is so manly. Aizawa watched Izuku go from student to student, offering top-of-the-line support gear that most professional companies would struggle to match. The multitude of quirks at his disposal combined with the best support students from both UA and I Island meant that they were able to create some truly spectacular items. After a few more items gifted, Aizawa was pretty sure he'd put the pieces together. It was only a week earlier when Eri had done something very similar, but instead of giving out quirk-powered equipment she used cookies. Specifically, she had been having a hard time making friends in kindergarten, so they helped her make some cookies that she shared with the class. He didn't let his expression change, but internally he could admit that it was adorable to watch Izuku mimic Eri's friendship strategies. Jiro was looking over the headphones she'd been given. They were designed to monitor how much noise she was receiving, and would deploy earplugs that had the quirk soundproof in them if it went above a certain decibel. This managed to cover one of her main weaknesses, and they had mix in them as well, so they would actually boost her hearing even higher when sound was at normal levels. She had paused for a moment, looking at the tricolored M on the side. What's up with the M logo? Are you starting a company or something? My Hatsune took this opportunity to sprint towards her and get unnecessarily close. Yes. I was going to create the Hatsune Corporation as soon as I graduated, but I was eventually convinced to partner with my fellow scientists to abandon my dreams and rebrand my future company to Triple M. Aizawa heard Melissa mutter to herself. Convince her? It was her idea. If you're all intelligent test subjects then you'll know it stands for Midoriya, Melissa, and the most important member, Mai. The color scheme was also my work of genius, using our air colors to create an unforgettable logo that shall go down in history. A few people looked over at the comma and collected Melissa, who was in extreme contrast with the teenaged mad scientist. She just shrugged and continued organizing the various support items Izuku wanted to give out to the class. What can I say? She's a bit insane, but it's fun to work with someone so passionate about what we do. At this point, My head jumped up onto Ojiro's desk and was maniacally laughing while explaining how they would take over the world by selling good products at low prices in order to help both heroes and support civilians with quirk-related disabilities. Yaozu was testing the self-repairing fabric she was given when she looked back at Izuku. I'm surprised none of these items have been made of platinum so far. Did you need it for a separate project? Izuku responded with a highly intelligent Aizawa cut him off before he could make any half-assed excuses. I wasn't told you were giving him any materials. What exactly did you give him? The exasperation never quite left his voice. I suppose I've given him a fair number of different raw materials in exchange for ideas on how to use my quirk, such as tungsten or titanium, but most recently I gave him 20 pounds of platinum. I was worried about the economy at first, but he assured me it wouldn't be sold in any way. Aizawa didn't know what exactly to do about that, or what it even meant, but he just assumed it would be added to the list of confusing and suspicious things Izuku had done without explanation. Before they could delve too deeply into that topic though, Kaminari spoke up, pulling the attention of the class. How come Rikugu is the only one who didn't get something? Izuku froze for a moment and looked more than a bit awkward. Well. I figured he would just yell at me if I did. As if to prove his point, Bakugu immediately shouted back. Goddamn right I don't. I don't need your bullshit help to be the best. Besides, I don't really want to be his friend since he's mean to me. Kirishima looked over at him, confusion all over his face. Wait, you gave us this stuff because you wanted us to be your friends? That doesn't make much sense. The awkward look turned to panic. Please don't get mad. I wasn't trying to bribe you or anything like, okay, I guess it could be considered a bribe, but I was just trying to do nice things so you'd maybe want to be friends. Kirishima scratched the back of his head as he thought about how to phrase his thoughts. Sorry bro, I'm not great at words all the time. I meant that it was weird to do because I thought we were already friends. I can't speak for everyone, but I kinda assumed just about everyone else thought of you as a friend too. Why would you need to convince us to do something that we were already doing? The rest of his classmates quickly agreed, affirming that they were definitely his friends. It took very little time for Izuku to get completely overwhelmed by their positive affirmations and break down crying. From that point on, the rest of that day's homeroom was replaced with a group hug session where most of the class huddled together. Once again, he would never admit to thinking it was adorable or having told President Mick to start his English class late so they wouldn't cut off their moment of friendship. Author's notes. Hello my readers, I have a special announcement for all of you. If you've read my works in the past, this shouldn't be a huge surprise as this has happened before. As a trans, specifically non-binary, author, if someone comments something negative about the fact that I use queer characters, I add more out of spite. In this case, the user Thuender of Pandora activated this clause by commenting on my decision to have David be trans in chapter 20, saying, random tranny sheet at the end. Literally why? I know it's your fanfic, but this is the comedy equivalent of being the straight man for 20 chapters before switching to bad slapstick for no discernible reason. And I don't care if you want to ruin your own story or add a bunch of out-of-place trannies, I simply don't read stories with cringe authored tracks in them. So I will be adding more trans characters in their honor, as I refuse to create any work that a transphobe can enjoy to any degree. That said, the vast majority of you are wonderful and I hope you continue enjoying this wild ride of a story. Oh, I definitely will. Let's continue folks. Chapter 30, a Loki chapter of hanging out with friends. Izuku sat at lunch with a few of his new friends from class. They'd just been told during homeroom that the UA Sports Festival would be in a few weeks, so the hero classes would be focused on training and building skills so they can show off. Uraraka, Ida, Su, and Todoroki were at the table with him and were at varying levels of excitement. At the lowest end was Todoroki. I don't really care one way or another. I've planned on using the festival as another chance to only use my ice and anger my father. But since he's been arrested, it wouldn't work. After having his quirk taken away and with the secrets of Tuya revealed, public opinion of Endeavor had dropped at unheard of levels and he was arrested not long after. The Hero Association normally protected Endeavor from the consequences of his actions, but this time too many people knew and he didn't have the strength that was needed to make him worth the effort in the eyes of the government. By taking his quirk away, he went from being the AHAAH's loyal soldier to a liability and a problem. Shadow paused and thought. Would he be allowed to watch TV from prison? In that case I'll try to lose as badly as possible since he's counting on me being his legacy. In the range of people getting pumped up for the festival and training as hard as possible, there isn't really a lower option than planning to throw your fights to taunt your imprisoned father. Next was Tsu, who seemed mostly neutral on the idea. I don't mind it, but I doubt it will make a difference in my career, Ribbit. Since I'm going into the niche field of water rescue I won't have to compete with lots of people for a job, and the AHAAH always wants more water heroes, Ribbit. She wasn't wrong. Since Japan had so much coastline there were never enough water heroes to monitor the borders as much as they wanted. It wasn't as glamorous, but they did the important job of preventing smuggling, rescuing anyone from the sinking ships, and enforcing fishing regulations. And lots of heroes that could be more aquatic preferred to stay inland in order to increase their rank since there's not a lot of press on the open ocean to see you being heroic. Plus, Tsu had never been that showy either, so it made sense she wasn't enthusiastic about competing in front of thousands. That didn't mean she wasn't competitive, she would definitely try to win, but he figured she'd probably prefer it without the crowds. Ida was quite excited, in his own way, which meant giving them lectures on how prestigious of an event it was and how his brother had won his own sports festival his first year. We must all strive to do our very best and show the world our heroic nature as the next generation. It was a bit much, but Ida wouldn't be himself if he wasn't a little intense all the time. It was a little odd to hear him ramble about how important it was to be noticed and appreciated by heroes to get internships since he planned on going with brother. And finally, there was Uraraka, who was acting more like it was a gladiatorial match than a friendly school tournament. I will crush everyone in my path and win. Who's with me? She had an aura of intense determination and pumped her fist into the air. They gave her a confused but supportive round of agreement. After a few moments Izuku looked over at her. So, what has you so pumped up for the festival? I know you can be kind of competitive, but this seems like even more than usual. That said, kind of competitive was a hit of an understatement. They'd played Mario Kart together at one point when she'd visited and she had a tendency to turn it into a full contact sport. Her expression shifted into one far more awkward and sheepish. Oh, well, I just want the chance to get noticed so I can get a good internship next year and join a well-paying agency once I graduate. Ida looked over with confusion and disagreement clear across his face. Well-paying? Surely there are more important aspects to hero agencies? She looked down at the table in embarrassment. To be honest, I'm becoming a hero for the money. I know it's a lot less honorable than you guys, but my family is really poor and I want to be able to take care of them. Shadow nodded. That seems honorable to me. But why does it matter if you have an honorable reason? I plan on being a hero out of spite, but I'll still be saving people. Who cares why you save people as long as you do a good job? That clearly went against anything she'd thought before. Indeed voiced his aggressively polite disagreement, but Izuku agreed with it. Having good intentions was nice, but what the person actually did felt more important. He thought of All Might, who spoke of justice and peace, but he'd only been an unpleasant person for Izuku and honestly not the most heroic. So which mattered more, heroic heart or heroic actions? Their conversation went in different directions, but Izuku's mind kept going back to how everyone felt about the festival. More specifically, where on that range did he fall? The truth was that he really didn't know how he felt. Every positive aspect seemed to have a matching negative. He'd get to see the other classes using their quirks and it was always fun to analyze new quirks, But they'd probably use them poorly and he'd have to deal with holding back his desire to take them. He'd get to show off how much more skilled he'd become with all his training and practice, but there were always weirdos that started declaring him to be some sort of god or were just mean, and that kind of ruined showing off to the public and made him want it to be more private. He'd be competing with his friends, who were always fun to hang out with, but he didn't want to make anyone look bad by beating them without effort or be rude by not trying his best and letting someone beat him. It was also complicated and had too many feelings. He thought about it the rest of the day and tried to explain his many feelings to his friends in a long-winded ramble as they were leaving class. Tsu looked him dead in the eye, which she didn't seem to realize was weirdly intimidating. Then don't try to win. Just focus on having fun with your friends and don't worry about winning or doing your best. Ribbit. He just stood there and thought for a moment. That actually made a lot of sense. He knew he could easily win, and so did everyone else, so did it really matter if he got on the podium? Huh. Thanks Tsu, you give really good advice. I think I'll do that. I just hope it doesn't come off as patronizing or mean. She just shrugged. Ribbit. It can be a little disheartening training alongside you, but then I remember you're one of the strongest beings on the planet and I stop worrying about keeping up with you. His other friends nodded, clearly feeling similarly but hadn't been bold enough to just say it out loud. Uraraka shoved his shoulder a little. Enough worrying about that. How's your sister? Still being tiny and adorable, I assume? Oh. Thanks for reminding me. I totally forgot something I'd wanted to do. With that he vanished into thin air. The four of them just looked at each other, silently asking if the others knew what he had left to do, but all of them were equally unsure. That said, none of them were too concerned. It was absolutely the sort of thing they were used to from being his friend the last few weeks. Kaminari had been on his way home when their class group had appeared about a foot in front of him, causing them to immediately collide and fall to the ground. Whoa. Didn't see you there. Sorry, I missed my teleporting. It can be hard to aim at times. They were both quiet for a moment after speaking over each other and finally stood back up. Are you here on purpose or is this just a weird quirk thing? No, this was on purpose. Well, finding you was, running into you like an idiot was an accident. But anyways, I needed your help with something. He was less than 5 minutes from being home and relaxing after a long day of training his quirk at school and had already shorted out once. He had a good guess at what he wanted, so he put on a slightly strained smile and verified his assumption. What do you need me to power? The guy clearly liked building stuff and it was only a matter of time before he needed someone, to power his wacky prototypes. He normally didn't mind being the local battery pack too much, but he mostly just wanted to sleep and recharge, pun intended. His classmate just looked confused, turning his head to the side like a dog hearing a new sound for the first time. Nothing? I think your quirk is great for being a hero, but not great as a long-term power source. Plus, I'm not sure you can produce more than my tooth generator. On one hand, it was a relief that the local tiny green god didn't want to use him as a glorified AA battery. But on the other hand, what on earth is a tooth generator? Well, I needed a generator that took up very little space and didn't have emissions, so I made one out of a few thousand teeth that I arranged in a grid. Oh, the context here is that I have a quirk that gives each of my teeth the output of a taser and another quirk that lets me remove body parts. My guy, please stop talking about your horror movie generator. I really regret asking about that. Anyways, what did you need from me if not that? He didn't want to associate his power with the grid of teeth that apparently made him obsolete, but sometimes that's how the cookie crumbles. I heard you talking about watching someone streaming video games and wanted to talk to you about video games. Kaminari just stared at him for a moment. How was Midoriya simultaneously so terrifying and also a cinnamon roll made of innocence? Sure buddy, you're nearly at my house anyways, and my parents won't be home for a few hours. Plus they don't mind me having friends over. That said, they might have a heart attack when they see the hero, vigilante that saved All Might. After a few minutes, they sat in his room. "So, what did you want to talk about? I didn't take you as a big gamer. That's kind of the problem. I don't know anything about video games, but my brother pretty much only talks through game references and is also terrible at explaining what they mean. And recently he became a streamer and it's gotten even worse. Every time I tried looking things up I just got even more confused." "Whoa, your brother is a streamer? That's pretty cool. And yeah, I can hopefully help with some stuff. What kind of games does he stream?" Honestly, he felt kind of honored that someone didn't understand something and came to him for answers. Sure, it was video game knowledge, but that still meant he was trusted to explain the complicated world of gamer lingo. "Thank you so much." He gave a smile that was far too pure. He does fast running on obscure games. "Oh. And my little sister Eri does commentary while he plays." Kaminari just stared at him for a moment as he processed the words. "Do you mean speedrunning?" "Yeah. That's the one." "Wow, you weren't joking about not knowing stuff." "Not that that's bad," he quickly corrected. "I'll pull up a few of his videos and we can watch it together, and I'll explain whatever you get confused on." Author's notes: sorry for the big gap between chapters. I was finishing up a story and it was taking all my attention and inspiration. I wanted to focus a bit on the green bin befriending everyone. Next time will be a chapter dedicated to Tamura and Eri friendship and them being streamers. Chapter 31, Video Games and Backstories. Tamura sat in his new home, happy with the result but frustrated at how he got there. His little brother was so helpful and got on his nerves. Izuku needed help destroying some stuff on a large scale which would take forever with his other quirks, and he was always happy to turn things to dust. After turning some mountain he didn't recognize into dust, his idiot brother gave him a deed to a house. He could guess it was probably because their dad had been talking about Tamura needing to move out to learn independence or whatever. So now he had a place to live and was the healthiest he'd ever been. Also because of his stupidly helpful dumbass brother. The sneaky bastard had run by and kissed his arm like a weirdo, making him pass out until his stats reached full. When he woke up his HP was at max 2, every scab on his neck and split lip was gone along with any aches or pains. It was weird to look in the mirror and not have any bags under his eyes or chapped lips. It definitely felt better even if he would never tell Izuku that under any circumstance. There was no forking way he would give the favorite son any compliments anytime soon. The dumbass already acted like he was the main character. As he set up a game, there was a knock on the door. He walked over, knowing who it was even before he heard the exciting chatting. As soon as he opened the door, Iori came shooting into the house. "Tamu." He gave a grunt in response, but she understood it was friendly and gave a big smile back. Aizawa stood in the doorway and looked around for a second before nodding. "All right, I'll be back to pick her up in a few hours. You both know the rules." Yeah. Make the place clean before she visits, don't do crime here, don't feed her junk food, and don't play violent games. And don't go anywhere else. I don't want to have to worry about where you are." Eri looked back at her dad. "Why would we go anywhere? The stream is about to start?" "Yeah, Aizawa, get out of here so we're not late." After a little more glaring, Aizawa left and Eri ran over to his gaming room. He'd been babysitting her the last few weeks since the hero school sheet kept going late to prepare for the sports bullshit. He didn't mind having her over, even though he'd never admit that either, and was a good commentator. She sat in her gaming chair, which was just a regular office chair but with a bunch of pillows as a booster, and waited impatiently as he finished setting up the camera and made sure everything was working right. "You ready, brat?" "Yeah. Let's show those noobs who's boss." Shigaraki had a genuine, some might say evil-looking, grin in response. He was teaching her so well. The light next to the camera turned green and the monitor to his left showed the chat and what the viewers saw. On the right monitor was the game he'd be playing. Welcome back or whatever. In case you NPCs forgot to read the title, we'll be continuing this series of speedrunning various horse games my little sister likes. He moved his mouse over to press play when he was immediately interrupted. Nah, you can't start yet. I need to do the intro. Do it quick then. Okay. Here it goes. She squinted her eyes in thought and incredible focus before speaking. Hello internet people, I'm Beep, the best unicorn ever and my big brother who is the bestest at video games. And today we're gonna play. Tom Moore had set up his computer so he could bleep her words whenever she was about to say something she shouldn't, like her real name. He'd tried to explain why she shouldn't say her name, but she refused to change her intro that she spent a lot of time practicing so she could say it on every stream. He looked over and saw her face scrunched up as she tried to remember what game they were playing this time. It was kind of funny since the game was already up and the title was in all caps across the screen. The nicest thing might have been to help her out, but it was hilarious, so he waited a solid minute. After letting her guess just about every other game, he pointed at the screen. She didn't have a lot of words down yet, since, unsurprisingly, the Yakuza didn't teach her to read. But luckily, sounding out one of the few words she knew was enough for her to remember the game she asked him to play. Princess Unicorn Adventures. Technically, Princess Unicorn Adventures 3, The Missing Tiara, but I doubt anyone gives a shit. Oh, and the thing that someone said as a joke yesterday is now real because I live on Sprite and energy drinks. He grabbed the tablet and handed it to Eri. Congrats, you're now a mod. You'll see the chat there and you can ban people and stuff like that. Yay. I'm gonna be the best mob. No, not mob, you know what. Fine. He saw the chat quickly fill up with people being alarmed over having a child, as a moderator, since any comments section tended to be less than child appropriate. Don't worry, she can't read. Unless you write sheet like, apple, unicorn, cat, what other words do you know? I can write my name. Oh. And I can write daddy and papa. He looked in the chat, seeing one person insulting her for not knowing more words at her age. He made a note of the username so he'd remember to find their identity and ruin their life later on. No one insulted his little sister and got away unscathed. But that was enough side quest bullshit. Without really announcing it, he started the timer and clicked play on the children's game. What followed was 3 hours of incredibly high-skilled gameplay that seemed incredibly out of place in the world of Princess Unicorn. He had spent many sleepless nights finding various glitches and shortcuts that let him speedrun through the game as quickly as possible. He explained what he was doing on occasion, but mostly their gameplay discussion was Eri rambling about various things. As he dismounted with frame-perfect timing mid-jump, he managed to get over a wall and win a race in 20 seconds that should have taken at least 10 minutes. Next he clipped through a mountain, skipping almost a dozen steps in the quest line. All the while he re-explained things that were definitely very important. Last week how he got scared of a bird that flew at her during recess and she turned into sand. She does that a lot. Hannah joked about making a sand castle with her. I told her that was mean and not a nice joke. She didn't listen though, so I told the teacher she was being mean. Eri mumbled the next bit incomprehensibly. First off, don't brag about being a snitch. And second, I can't hear you when you mumble like that. She pouted and stomped her foot a little. I said I hid cheese in her backpack a few days ago so it would smell bad, and when she got to school today she smelled like really smelly cheese. And everyone knows cheese smells are the hardest to get rid of, so now her bag will be smelly forever. Shigaraki laughed loudly as he kept going through the game. Great work, kiddo. After beating the game he officially had the world record, which wasn't hard since there didn't seem to be any serious attempts by anyone else. Alright noobs, let's see what happened in chat while I was doing sheet. After a few moments he looked back over at Eri. Why's over half the chat banned? They weren't using the funny faces with their words. Well, you heard the lady. If you don't use emoticons that she likes you'll get banned. He'd done banned them for now, but it was too funny that it was controlled by the whims of his player 2 to change his mind on her being the mod. They ended the stream not too much later and let her take a nap for about half an hour since she tired herself out. A few minutes after she woke up, and was once again full of energy, a crow flew through their open window and into the kitchen before turning into his annoying little brother. Eri quickly threw herself into his arms in a big hug. Izuku, you're all done with your extra classes? Yep. But your dads are still busy, so we can go and have breakfast on our own. She tilted her head to the side like a confused puppy. Breakfast? But it's dinner time? Not in Mexico it isn't. I found this place that has the best burritos in the entire world. Wow, you checked the whole world for burritos? Well, a lot of my quirks burn through calories really fast, which are fancy words that mean I need to eat a lot of food. So I've been teleporting around the world, trying lots of local foods, and that's how I found the best burritos made by this lovely old lady. Technically it's not a breakfast food at all, but every burrito is a breakfast burrito if you have it for breakfast, and since we're having breakfast for dinner it's a breakfast burrito. Before Tamura could comment on how dumb that logic was, the two of them had already vanished into thin air. He was probably going to order a pizza for dinner and start practicing for the next game, Cowgirl Safari, which was based around riding around the Wild West and taking pictures of animals. Unexpectedly, there was a knock at the door, interrupting his thoughts. He walked over to answer it but also took off his two-fingered gloves in case he wanted to kill whoever was on the other side. Instead some asshole he should kill, it was instead an asshole he sort of respected he both cooled an ''t/wouldn't kill. Eraserhead, your brat already got your smaller brat. They're in Mexico if you're looking for them. The man just groaned. Of course they are. That's fine I guess, I wanted to talk to you anyways. Shigaraki glared at him, unsure what he could want. Can I come in and sit down, or are we just going to stand in the hallway? Fine. Make yourself at home or whatever. They both walked in and sat in opposite beanbag chairs, much to Aizawa's annoyance. That was the only type of seat in his living room. So, the hell do you want? He seemed to think for a moment. How much do you know about your extended family? Specifically your biological family? He scowled in response. Hard to know about dead people. Not exactly the chattiest. Not that it's any of your business. If you just came here for that then I'm gonna skip this dialogue. Fine. Then let's talk about Yuri's family until you figure out why it's relevant. Shigaraki continued to scowl but didn't interrupt. Let's start with her parents. Her mother had a horn that could store and release light. Not particularly powerful, but her father was the head of the Yakuza, so she was powerful in other ways. Yuri's father had a similar quirk to hers, but he didn't have the storage aspect. So instead of being able to store her quirk's effect for months or even years before releasing it all at once, he could only de-age people a few seconds at a time. Theoretically he could keep someone young forever, but he'd need to be in physical contact with them at all times and never deactivate his quirk. I'm sure you can see how this created Yuri's quirk. But what's more important is her grandmother and her aunt. You see, grandmother on her father's side had a quirk that allowed her to control her own age. She was sadly stuck in a quirk marriage where, from what I can tell, they were hoping to get an immortality quirk in the next head of their Yakuza but stepped in front of a bus before she could be forced to bear more children. Aizawa could tell that Tamura was rapidly running out of his already limited patience and he'd need to get to the point of this. But at the same time it was information that he wanted Tamura to have, so he'd just have to get over himself and listen. Her only children were a pair of twins. Yuri's father was one, and the daughter was named Nao Nakamura, later to become Nao Shimura. The lack of recognition made it clear just how much Shigaraki had repressed his childhood. She had the opposite ability of her brother, she could age things through physical contact. Again, Not particularly powerful since it would take a considerable amount of time to see any clear results. Her husband could send out shockwaves of force through an object by placing 5 fingers on it. It was quite a powerful quirk. It's safe to assume that the quirk amplification aspect of his mother's quirk, One for All, played a part in its strength. And in the boosted strength of yours compared to your mother's. Creating a quirk that creates a wave of aging so rapid it turns everything to dust. Aizawa thought it might be rude to drop so much information at once, but he had to take into account Tamura's attention span and his tendency for violence when someone goes beyond it or wastes his time being subtle. He sat there for about a minute as he worked through the information he just got, piecing it together slowly but surely. It sort of reminded him of watching a computer buffer. So, those are my parents? Yeah, records say your birth name is Tenko Shimura, and it doesn't take a genius to find that your adoptive father only made those adoption and name change forms official a few months ago, but dated them as if he did it a decade ago. I take it you didn't know that? I knew. I just don't think about it. So, I'm related to Eri? That's right, kid. You're her cousin. Which explains why you both have the same eyes and hair, plus the similar quirks. Huh. Before Aizawa got to say anything, Izuku suddenly appeared in the room with Eri on his back and a large plate of burritos in each hand. Hey, I'm back with extra burritos? At the lack of excitement he realized something was definitely off. I feel like I missed something? Do you not like burritos? Chapter 32. Fork you and the gender you rode in on. Izuku sat in the living room reading through an anatomy textbook for the 3rd time while Shadow the cat was curled up in his lap. Speed read made that process a lot easier though, so it wasn't quite that big of an accomplishment. Hisashi looked over and smiled as he did some cleaning. Enjoying some light reading? I saw you reading another one in class the other day. Where do you find so many medical textbooks anyways? There was the implied question of him making sure Izuku hadn't robbed some poor med student. The library has a bunch of textbooks that people donate after graduating. He looked at his watch, conveniently avoiding any follow-up questions about why. I'm off to hang out with Gigan Tomika. This was actually a great excuse because it was something he did with a fair amount of regularity. The man was sort of like a giant puppy and loved having company. Plus he was a great sparring partner. Alright, have fun kiddo and make sure to be home before dinner. With that he put the kitten on the ground, much to its annoyance, and teleported away. An instant later he appeared in the house he had lived in for a few months. More importantly, though, it was where Dabi and some other vigilantes lived now. He looked over and saw Dabi, who'd grown out his hair a bit and overall just looked so much better than when they'd first met. Between using enhanced fruits to heal him and just not being homeless for an extended period of time, he was basically glowing in comparison. Hey brat, it's good to see you. Hey Dabi, it's good to be back after not seeing you all for a month or two. Is that new member here today? Fork yeah she is. Do you really think she'd miss out on this kind of chance? Plus the whole group is here so they can meet the guy in charge. Their little group had grown a bit from when he'd had to leave them behind. Dabi was their unofficial leader and he'd already met Spinner and Toga, but there were a couple new people he would only be meeting today for the first time. For what they did, they functioned as you'd expect typical vigilantes to. But what made them different was that they reported directly to Izuku. He hadn't needed their services much so far. But if he needed someone handled and couldn't do it himself for whatever reason, then they would be there to do the dirty work. He wasn't even sure how necessary it was to have them available, but he'd rather have them and not need them than the other way around. His father also strongly recommended having henchmen that no one knew were loyal to him and suggested having people like that in as many different areas as possible. He slowly had come to realize his father was recommending he create a spy network of loyal subordinates, but he'd worry about it later. Hey, the boss guy is here. Some creep I've never heard of just showed up. It didn't take a lot to guess that it was twice. The man had never done more than petty crime, but his mental health issues meant getting out of crime was near impossible. But even if he was clearly a bit odd, his quirk was something to behold. It was up there with Yarazu's, the ability to create matter from nothing with so few limitations. He didn't love how slimy and fleeting the quirk felt, but even his classmate couldn't compete with the raw power this quirk gave off. To create a fully sentient being, fragile copy or not, was a truly astounding power that left his hand jittering with a desire to take it for himself. With a quirk like that, he'd be able to create thousands if not millions of himself and help the world on a global level, stopping famines and curing plagues as a one-man army. He had to shake himself out of the daydream and greeted the man before he did something he'd regret. "Yep, I'm Izuku. Nice to meet you." While Dabi, Toga, and Spinner had started their little group for social justice and twice joined mostly just because he was in a bad spot and needed friends, Mr. Compress seemed to be in it for the thrill. That wasn't necessarily bad, but it did make him slightly more concerned about his loyalty than those that joined for ideals. Finally, there was the member he was there to meet with specifically. Magn had joined for vigilante social justice reasons too, and had a gorgeous magnetism quirk. Interestingly enough, it worked differently on different genders and made them glow accordingly. Which meant that her magnetism quirk could be used as a gender detector that had apparently had the unfortunate consequence of having outed various closeted trans people by mistake. "Yo, what Dabi said is true. You really wanna help me out? Well, you'll be helping me just as much. I've wanted to practice using overhaul on living people since I can only learn so much from my own corpses." He paused for a moment. "That sounds bad. Not corpses of people I killed, I mean my own corpse. I just take off my head, grow a new body, and experiment on my old body." Dabi nodded along, far more used to Izuku's antics and generally being terrifying and helpful at the same time. The short and less creepy version is that he's willing to exchange illegal healthcare for being a guinea pig. "That's how I got nearly all my scars healed up." "Hey, you don't gotta convince me. When a godlike teenager says he'll do your bottom surgery for free, you don't ask too many questions." Mag then handed over a piece of paper. "And here's what you asked for, a full breakdown of the new body I want." He read it over a few times. "Yeah, this should be doable. It's not hard to make a body that's smaller than the original, it's adding material that's tricky. I'm not backing out or anything, but just how painful is this gonna be? All I was told is you'd tear my body apart and put it back together. Well, the quirk is instant enough, you won't feel any physical pain. But it does leave an existential pain of your body knowing it died but is still alive. It's essentially cognitive dissonance where your mind can't comprehend that you're still alive, but it should wear off after a few days." Dabi sighed and rubbed his temples. "Can you not be a horrifying cryptid for 5 minutes?" Izuku realized pretty instantly that he was in trouble when he got home. It wasn't exactly hard to guess since his mom, dad, and both temporary guardians were sitting there waiting for him in the living room. "Oh, I can go. You're all clearly doing something and I wouldn't want to interrupt." He started to teleport away but felt glaring red eyes hold him in place. "You know what, on second thought I think I'll just sit down." Aizawa sighed and shook his head. "Do you have the slightest idea of what time it is?" No?" He honestly didn't and started to look over at the clock. Oh, it was apparently 1 in the morning. That would explain the parade of parents. His mom was the one that spoke up next. "Do you have any idea how worried we were? No one knew where you were and we just had to hope you'd come back. I don't know what I would have done if I'd lost you again. What if you'd been kidnapped or hurt and we had no idea something had happened? All for one is still on the loose and you're running around like there's nothing to be worried about. And don't even try to act like nothing happened, I can see blood in your hair." He wiped at his head in an attempt to clean it off. He wanted to point out that there wasn't anything to worry about since All for One was in the room and not causing problems. But there was a reason she was the one person in the room that didn't know Shigaraki Hisashi was actually all for one. He loved her dearly, but she would go and tell All Might immediately and it would turn into a fist fight. His dad nodded along. I think the better question is what you were doing. I had called, looking to set up another family dinner, and to my surprise they thought you were with Geigen Tomika, where you most certainly weren't. I was with Tamura. Yeah, that was a decent lie. Tamura wouldn't have had a reason to leave his apartment today, so they shouldn't be able to verify that. Tamura smirked as he stepped out from around the corner. Are you sure about that? While everyone else looked worried and upset, he just looked intrigued. Oh wow, did I say Tamura? I meant to say. The glares he received made it clear that his chances of getting away with this was pretty much zero. Aizawa sighed. You were with your vigilante friends, weren't you? The ones we explicitly told you to break contact with, since most of them are serial killers. Ex-serial killer. They don't do that anymore. They've stuck to non-lethal vigilantism since I asked them to. Damn it, kid. Don't you understand that this is a direct violation of the agreement you signed to join the school? You agreed to cut ties with your criminal contacts, not only on paper but you told us you would as well. You need to actually think through the consequences of your actions. Even if you feel untouchable, that doesn't mean those around you are. We also signed documents agreeing to keep you from going back to crime and would be put in a very difficult situation if you were caught. He was caught off balance. What do you mean? Hisashi and I are legally required to report any suspicious or illegal activity. We're essentially your probation officers. So let's say a few weeks from now it's discovered that you spent a day with your criminal contacts and we hadn't reported it. We would likely lose our teaching and hero licenses at a minimum and would be facing jail time at worst. In either case it would take a lot to argue that Hiri should remain in our care. He sighed deeply and rubbed his temples before continuing. I've never regretted sticking my neck out for you and I'm not starting now. I just need to understand and respect that we're taking a risk here. Now, I'm going to ask one more time, where were you and what were you doing? Okay, so, I went over to the house I used to live at to help Mag since she's trans but can't access healthcare. I used overhaul to give her a new body. Which is apparently really hard to do, even though I read a bunch of books about the body and it took like a dozen tries and I had to make her 3 inches shorter than planned since I lost a lot of the material in the process. That's probably why there's blood in my hair. It was successful eventually but very messy since the quirk kind of explodes the person first. And then when I was done with it I helped Dabi next since they apparently didn't like their body either. So I gave Dabi a feminine-leaning androgynous body and that only took about 3 tries and that was all really stressful, so I hung out with Toga and did each other's nails for a while until I calmed down, which is really nice since she used to be really unhinged. She still likes blood and violence, but now it's a want instead of a need and she's clearly doing so much better, and once we finished doing that I came back home. He inhaled harshly after saying all of that in one breath. Hisashi was the first to speak up. Wait a second, is that why you've been reading all those anatomy books? So you could try doing experimental surgeries on your own without any medical professionals involved? Even his dad looked some level of disappointed. I can respect that you wanted to do a good thing for your friends, but that was a very reckless and irresponsible way to go about it. What would you have done if you hadn't been able to put her back together correctly? And you'll certainly have to apologize to Geigen Tomika. We went looking for you there first, so he's very worried about you. Now he felt even worse, imagining the giant man all weepy because he was worried something happened to him. He felt pretty awful, everyone just looking disappointed. Except for Tamura, who just looked confused. Dabi's a girl now? Huh? Oh, I'm not sure, I asked them the same thing. But I was just told gender is a construct and I burn down constructs all the time. So I have no idea what that means and am just sticking to they, them until someone is given a real answer. He just kept looking truly baffled. I don't get it. If you're going to make a new avatar, why wouldn't you go all the way? The elder Shigaraki looked over with a raised eyebrow. What do you mean go all the way? Becoming a girl? It's clearly the better option, so I only change some stats? Everyone looked at each other, Izuku speaking up quietly. I don't think that opinion is as universal as you think it is. I think the majority of people are happy with being the gender they were born as. Some pieces seemed to stick together, causing Tamura to get up and just leave the house rather than risk talking about emotions. Everyone was silent for a few minutes before Aizawa spoke up. Don't think that this distraction means you aren't in trouble. You are very much grounded. We've let you have a lot of freedom in going around without supervision, and that's over until you prove we can trust you. That means no more working on secret projects or leaving the house without explicit permission or being accompanied. And let me be clear now, if you try to use clever quirk usage, loopholes, or some technicality to get around this, then it will only be extended and stricter. Am I understood? Izuku gave a shameful nod before getting hooked. I'm glad you're okay, we were all really worried about you when we couldn't find you. This quickly turned into a very large group hug of unlikely co-parents, making it clear how loved he was even when he made mistakes and got in trouble. Author's notes: so, when I decided to add more trans characters out of spite, as I do, I figured I had a few ways to go about it. Having a character that is frequently used as trans headcanon, Kaminari, Jiro, Shinsu. Or maybe add in a trans AHAAHHAAHHAAH. Then I remembered that time writing a crackfic and decided to do what felt the most chaotic and funny instead. So now Dabi and Shigaraki are trans, and I'm going to find a way to make them transbians together in a way that vaguely makes sense in the plot. And remember kids, if you complain about trans people existing, the next characters whose gender I trans will be you. Chapter 33, It's time to sport some festivals. Izuku was downright giddy as he sat in the waiting room with his friends, all of them getting ready for their first sports festival. His focus wasn't on winning or losing, instead he planned on just having fun using quirks that didn't use as much and maybe showing off a bit. While most of him hoped he didn't hurt anyone's feelings, there was a small part that thrived on the knowledge that even if he lost, everyone would know it wasn't because he couldn't win. The whole world knew that if he took a fight seriously, then there were very few people on the planet that would have a chance at stopping him. Granted, he didn't actually like hurting people, so these fights were theoretical and he typically preferred less harmful means of taking down a villain. They were about to be called out when Bukigu came up to him and poked him in the chest. You better take this sheet seriously, or I'll kick your ass. Before he could respond, the angry teen grabbed a crowbar and stomped off. He'd been approved to bring a single weapon, tool with him into the tournament since everyone else had quirks. He'd noticed that Kachan used it a lot for practice and hoped he knew how to use it well enough to not seriously hurt someone with it. Kirishima looked over at him. What was that about, bro? He's always had a thing since we were kids about me not trying hard enough. Don't worry about it. Before they could really get into Bukigu's weird behavior, they were called out to the field. It was such a weird and exciting experience to see the sports festival stadium from this side of the field. He'd watched just about every single recording of old tournaments, but it all looked so much different looking up at the stands instead of just seeing it from one of the many cameras around and above them. The rest of the classes came out one at a time as they were called by a very enthusiastic present Mick and a grumbling Aizawa who only made a few comments here and there. Once everyone was on the field with them, Midnight moved to the platform in the middle of the arena and grabbed a mic. Well, hello there, welcome to the first year sports festival. Before we really get going, let's have some opening words from the vigilante-turned-hero student that you've all been waiting to see. That was Izuku's cue to go up on the platform with her. Typically the opening speech is given to the highest scorer of the general admission portion of the hero exam, but they made an exception in his case. He had asked Uraraka to make sure she didn't mind him taking her place, and she pointed out that he technically was given the same exam as her, rather than the recommendation exam. If the speaker would be determined by who destroyed the most robots in the exam, Then it was Izuku without a doubt. He'd thought about it for a bit, what he would say while the whole world was listening. He'd considered just saying something basic that amounted to do your best, plus ulta, but then he decided that wasn't particularly fun or exciting. He smiled to himself as he approached the mic. He might not admit it to others, but he did love making dramatic statements. If you're waiting for me to give a grand speech about how amazing heroes are and how we're all the best, plus ultra, then you'll have to keep waiting. There were a lot of gasps at the strong opening, and he could have sworn he heard Aizawa sigh in exasperation over the speakers. Hero as a job title and hero as the noun aren't synonyms. I think there is a lot of overlap. Plenty of professional heroes are heroic, but we can't pretend that it's a requirement or that they're the only ones. Some of the most heroic people I've met aren't official heroes. Being heroic doesn't have to mean going out in the streets and fighting crime with your fists. It means being kind and inspiring kindness in others. That's the kind of world I want to bring forth, one where people help each other however they can. Because at the end of the day, it's your actions that define you, not a piece of plastic the government hands out. Plus ultra. Just about the entire stadium was shocked in silence as he went back to join his classmates. Uraraka just shook her head. Do you really have to be so dramatic all the time? Todoroki gave an awkward thumbs up. I liked it. Tokoyami nodded. What a wonderful banquet of madness. Uraraka just sighed. See what I mean? All of our most dramatic classmates loved it. They joked with each other as Midnight said a few words before announcing that they would be doing an obstacle course. All the students were led into a tight tunnel. He quickly noticed everyone getting out of his way so he could move to the front. He looked around for someone he recognized Mina in the crowd. Hey, why's everyone moving away from me? Buddy, everyone knows you're super strong and no one wants to be in front of you when you do whatever crazy stuff you do next. So they want you in the very front. He couldn't really deny that he had a flair for the dramatic, destructive at this point. Oh, I guess that makes sense. A few more seconds passed as they waited for the race to begin. At the moment Midnight cracked her whip, to signal the start, he activated spring legs with speed boost, launching his body forward out of the tunnel and into the air. He looked back and saw a bunch of his classmates doing something similar. Watching Momo propel herself by creating a metal staff into the ground was actually really clever, and the one time he approved of her using her quirk to create sticks. He dropped speed boost and just bounced from spot to spot, enjoying the feel of spring legs even if it was far from his fastest quirk. They hadn't gotten too far into the race before platforms began to lift robots from the ground. He smiled and jumped directly towards one of the smaller ones, excited to make use of a quirk he hadn't gotten much practice with. Right as he collided with the robot he activated Mimic and merged with the green metal. He turned and faced the other bot, reasonably excited to fight robots while possessing one. As he went to charge them he immediately toppled over, quickly learning that inhabiting a robot and knowing how to control one were totally different things. After a few attempts at his objectively cool idea he gave up and left the metal body. A handful of weaker bots were moving in to surround him and block his path, which he dealt with by putting them under the effects of heavy. As they collapsed under their own weight he ran past them, just in time for the giant zero-pointers to join the fray. He charged at them with a huge smile as he activated King Kong and Growth, becoming a 100-foot-tall gorilla with green fur. He made sure no one was underfoot before tackling one of them to the ground and wrestling the giant robot. The other two turned their attention to him as well, creating a veritable mosh pit of machinery and giant apes. He was getting dogpiled by the bots and needed something to help him turn the tide, without being a boring instant win. As he swung his hand down on one of them he activated Scissor Hands, carving up the mechanical behemoth with blades that were nearly 10 feet long. After slicing and dicing to his heart's content, he realized he was still at the very first obstacle of the race while everyone else had long since moved on. While he wasn't too focused on winning first place, he didn't want to get disqualified by not being in the first 40. He quickly dropped his other quirks and activated Crow, becoming a completely normal-looking bird other than the bright green eyes. He flew over the obstacle course where he saw some stragglers crawling across the cables connecting islands over a chasm, quickly followed by a large empty field with a warning to watch out for mines. At first he thought it was a bit extreme but saw that they weren't actual landmines, which made a lot more sense. Still, they seemed strong enough to knock someone back enough that it let others pass them pretty easily. He swooped down from above, letting himself glide into the exit gate before turning into a human and walking across the finish line. He heard Mick commentating as he entered the middle of the arena with the students that had already finished. Coming in 15th is Izuku Midoriya. Oops, he supposed he wasted more time than he realized at the front end, but 15th wasn't too bad overall. He saw Todoroki come in 30th as he calmly strolled into the middle of the arena. He was going the route of putting in minimal effort in order to piss off his incarcerated father. After a few more minutes the event was over and they were getting into teams for the second event. Most of his friends were teaming up together and Tsu bluntly explained that they couldn't show off for hero agencies and sponsors if they were with him. It did make sense though, he'd probably overshadow whoever he was on a team with, which made him a less appealing partner for those trying to get good internships. He saw a purple-haired kid walk over to him with a determined look and looked over his shoulder a few times as if to make sure no one was watching them. "Hey, would you want to join my team?" Tsu, as if not a moment had passed, he was suddenly standing with a purple-haired kid, Ojiro, and someone from Class B. All of them looked very confused as Midnight declared them the first place winners. Well, all except the purple-haired guy, who just looked very determined and was pointedly not looking at them. He looked around a bit more, trying to piece things together. The event was definitely over and they definitely won, but he had no idea how. "Hey, purple guy. Did you wipe my memory or something? I don't wanna be rude, but you're the only member of the team that doesn't look confused." Now he just looked at Izuku, completely baffled. "I just brainwashed you and you're worried about being rude? No, that's not right." Huh? Brainwashing isn't the right term. Brainwashing is a long-term effect that changes your thoughts and beliefs. This was clearly short-term mind control based on verbal cue, which is obviously a form of hypnosis or puppeteering quirk rather than brainwashing, totally different. The man just looked confused at having his terminology corrected, but they didn't have time to continue that talk since the matches were going to begin soon and he was off to have lunch with his friends. It didn't take him too long to find Uraraka, Ida, Tsu, and Todoroki in the lunch area. She waved him over to their table with a smile. "Hey Izuku, I saw you got hypnotized last round but didn't do anything since I figured you wouldn't care and would probably just geek out over it once it ended. Besides, all he had you do was telekinetically grab a bunch of headbands and create a circle of fire around the team. It seems like I was right about you not caring too much." Which he took as a free opportunity to ramble on about the applications of such a powerful hypnosis quirk in heroics for about the next 5 minutes. He probably could have kept going when he heard a very familiar voice from behind him. "Izuku." He turned around just in time to catch Iri, who was barreling towards him and giggled as he gave her a big hug. "Iri, how'd you get back here? I thought you were watching with Tamura? Papa said we were getting lunch together, but I couldn't tell you since it was a surprise." He saw Hisashi making his way over, chit-chatting with various people along the way with Tamura standing nearby and looking generally grumpy. And it was an amazing surprise. "You've met some of my friends before, but I don't think you've met Ida or Tsu." She wiggled and squirmed her way into Izuku's lap before giving a shy introduction. "Hi, this is Izuku. He's my brother." He patted her on the head and chuckled. "Honey, you're supposed to introduce yourself, not me. They already know me." She turned around and buried her face in his chest, saying something that sounded vaguely like it was an introduction. "All right, you did great, Iri. Let's just eat some lunch before it's time for the next round." Chapter 34, The sports festival is basically a gladiatorial match and we all know it, alright listeners. It's time for the first 1v1 match. You all know the rules. If you leave the ring, surrender, or are incapacitated, you are out. The winners will face each other until only the greatest remain. Izuku walked up onto the platform with a big smile. He was so excited to be part of the tournament section. It had been a fun and wild festival so far and he had a feeling it would only get more interesting. He was a little bit worried about his first match though. He'd have to be more careful than he'd planned. We've got quirks on quirks on quirks in this round, the ultimate battle of cut and paste versus copy and paste. On one side we've got Midoriya Izuku, the adorable broccoli-haired former vigilante with more quirks than I care to count. And on the other we have Monomoto, with the ability to copy any quirk, so you never know what you're gonna get. Yeah, that's why he was worried. What if he copied the ability to steal quirks and permanently stole them? So he'd have to keep Monoma from ever making contact and risking his quirks. Midnight raised her whip in the air. Take your places. Ready? Begin. Monoma dashed forward and split into a dozen pieces, making it harder to keep all of him away. He needed an attack that was AO rather than against a specific target. He blamed Tamura for any gamer lingo he knew/used. Activating air horn and bass boosted, a small brass horn popped out of his mouth in the direction of Monoma's incoming body parts. A wave of sound collided with him and scattered a large portion of him into the field around them. Monoma reformed and looked quite grumpy about the whole thing and stomped off back to the tunnel entrance. He felt kind of bad for winning the fight so quickly, but in his defense he was worried Monoma would try and take his quirks from him. He went back to the 1A seating to hang out with his friends, and Eri who'd been allowed to join them. Technically she wasn't allowed in the student seats, but who was going to kick her out? She ran up to him and reached towards him while making grabby hands, hoping to get picked up. He laughed and lifted her up onto his shoulders for extra measure. There you go, now you're the tallest unicorn out there. He hung around his friends for a bit, watching Ida do battle with a support student. Even though Ida seemed to be having a very frustrating time, it was pretty funny to watch him run around trying to catch the pink-haired girl flying around with ziplines and jetpacks. His attention was pulled away when he heard a mixture of giggling and squawking. When he looked up he saw Eri with a big smile as she pulled on Dark Shadow's ear tufts. The shadow quirk retreated back behind Tokoyami, shrunken down the same way as when he was around powerful lights. He looked up at his host while cowering and whimpering, "She's too bright." Eri frowned a little. "Is the birdie okay?" "Yeah. He's just taking a break." His friends came and went as they chatted with him and his little sister before going down for their own matches. He watched as Tsu bested a lackluster Todoroki, and he was honestly surprised he'd even made it this far since his entire plan was to do badly. It was an interesting discovery that Shinso's quirk only worked on an understandable response, which meant it didn't work on Ka-chan who just screamed incoherently when taunted or insulted. He had a great time watching all the different quirks being used by Class B, since he was already familiar with own class. Don't get him wrong though, he still loved watching his friends using their quirks too even if he knew them already. It wasn't long until it was time for his second match, so he handed Eri off to Uraraka, who was more than happy to hold on to the bundle of sunshine. He walked back to the arena, this time facing Ida, who made numerous hand motions and promised a fair fight, which felt redundant since he struggled to imagine Ida breaking rules in any way. For this fight he decided to use a funnier strategy that he could already guess. Ida wouldn't appreciate. But on the other hand it was going to be hilarious. As his friend charged at him at full speed he activated growth, metal muscles, and muscle augmentation. Pushing the augmentation to its limits and curling in on himself, he essentially turned into a giant metal orb. The final quirk was bird's eye view, so he could watch himself from above and make sure he didn't accidentally go over the edge. With all of that in place he began rolling at Ida like a giant pinball of doom. He felt the slight vibrations from Ida kicking him over and over to little effect, which is what made this strategy a bit unfair to his opponent. It's not exactly easy to inflict damage on a giant steel orb. Ida managed to dodge back and forth for a while but was eventually knocked out of the arena by his rolling around. Izuku dropped his quirks and wobbled as he stood back up. He hadn't really taken into account just how dizzy he would make himself rolling around like that. Sure, he almost fell down 3 different times on his way back to his seat, but it was definitely worth it since it was cool looking. The rest of the second round went by until there were only 4 of them left. Ieyasu had beaten Tokoyami, who he suspected had still been weakened from the brightness of Iri's smile. Yoraraka had won her match with Shiozaki. And finally, Katsuki had the most impressive battle where he managed to defeat Kirishima. No one had been expecting the angry quirkless kid with a crowbar to come out victorious over the redhead's defense. Izuku could admit that he'd underestimated him as well. Bokugu had used the bar of metal like a surgical instrument, striking at the weakest points in his armor until his classmate fell to the ground. Every time Kirishima went on the offense to try and turn the fight around, he found himself getting hit in the side or back of the knee with an incredible amount of force, or with the hooked end being used to simply yank his ankle out from under him. It was a hard battle and Katsuki was covered in scrapes and bruises, but he won against all odds. But what are odds in the face of the complete and utter refusal to fail? Izuku wasn't sure how he felt about Bokugu succeeding. Honestly, any emotions in regards to that ball of rage were a knot of confusing and conflicting thoughts. The solution he found best was to just not think about it at all. It wasn't much later that he was called down for a match he was honestly looking forward to. This one is bound to be interesting, folks. These two might be the most versatile and talented hero students I've ever seen, especially for first years. It's a battle between every quirk you can imagine and every tool you can imagine. Weapons versus powers. Only one can stand victorious. He looked at Ieyasu across the arena and gave her a big smile, which luckily seemed to relieve her of at least some of her anxiety. His classmate looked like she was on the verge of fleeing the stadium altogether, and he highly doubted being talked up by President Mick helped her nerves. He noticed her glance at their ref a few times before realizing what she was worried about. He looked over at Midnight and waved her over to get attention. Yes. You'll probably want to ref from further away. If I'm even a little right about her plan, you'll be at risk of ricochet. Her eyes widened a bit. Goodness, you youngsters sure don't hold back, and I like it. She joined Cementos at the end of the field, who'd already set up a protective barrier. Calling out loudly so they still heard her from the stage, "Ready? Begin." He had shock absorption and tough skin up as a precaution and used Cheetah to help him quickly close the distance between them. He didn't close it fast enough. He was about 10 feet away once she'd finished making and aiming her first creation. One of Momo's biggest difficulties was that most of the most powerful and straightforward objects she could make tended to be lethal, but he'd sparred with her enough that she knew he could take whatever she threw at him and could practice those kinds of fighting styles. That meant instead of trying to come up with a novel solution like a net or some kind of tranquilizer, she raised the barrel of her 12-gauge shotgun and fired it directly into his chest from very short range. It stung, but didn't do much more than shove him backwards and stop his advance. A few blasts directly to his face had him stumble and start to lose his balance. Before she could capitalize on that too much, he briefly activated larceny and took away her weapon, quickly tossing it out of bounds. He charged back in and dodged to the side when he saw a glow coming from her chest. Instead of a direct attack though, a fog came rolling out. At first he was worried about knockout gas, but he didn't think he saw her make a mask to go with it. He used X-ray vision to see past the fog, just in time to avoid the grenade she rolled over to him. This went on for at least 10 minutes as they tested each other's defenses and counters. Izuku at least was happy to remain in their stalemate, not wanting to use any quirks that would give him a near-instant win. Eventually he managed to close the distance with his handful of close combat quirks and used freeze tag on her, making her body lock up with an unpleasant but harmless cramp just long enough for her to surrender. That was really amazing. You've been getting so good at switching between weapons and styles. I really liked the blow darts and the time you sprayed gasoline. Have you considered making darts from inside your mouth to help with speed and stealth? She gave an exhausted smile up at him. We can try that later, for now we should get off the field. Oops, yeah, that's a good idea. He had sort of forgotten where they were. In his defense, she was one of his favorite people to spar since she could do so many different things with her quirk, now that she'd moved away from making sticks. They chatted about what types of poisons were best for darts since she couldn't use anything that was organic based and that really limited her options. Well, chatted is a bit misleading. Yaozu smiled and nodded as he helped her to the infirmary while he rambled about the pros and cons of different poisons. Before heading back to the stands, they both stopped by the waiting room to wish Uraraka luck. She was a bit nervous, but that was mostly just because it was a tournament that would be shown on national television. She wanted to make her family proud and make a good impression on recruiters so she could get a good internship. Everyone seemed sure that this was going to be an easy fight. It was the highest scorer on the entrance exam versus the quirkless kid. But Izuku wasn't so sure. Bakugo may be lots of things: egotistical, insecure, aggressive, violent, rude, etc. But he was also determined like no one else he'd met. Beyond that, he'd made it clear he had no intentions of going down easily in this tournament and wouldn't let anyone stand in his way. Izuku went back up and sat with his friends, Eri jumping back into his lap to watch the last match before the finals. If nothing else, he was curious to see what his strategy would be against such a powerful quirk, but on the other hand he did have a solid chance since she needed to get close to use it. If Bakugo's previous matches were intense, then this was a display of pure brutality. At first there was a rhythm of her trying to get within grabbing range but also needing to be very careful whenever she entered crowbar range. It was like a dance as they both avoided each other, knowing that it would only really take one well-placed hit to take either of them out. Eventually Uraraka took a risk and managed to dive under his most recent swing and land a full hand on his arm. She paid the price for that success though, as she received a powerful knee strike to the face. She stumbled backwards, dazed, but looking triumphant, clearly expecting he'd float off. Instead of drifting out of bounds, Bakugo lightly bounced on the ground, testing his movement with only the weight of his trusty crowbar keeping him down. That left her target obvious to anyone paying even a little attention. If she got her hand on that weapon, she'd be the winner. She charged in again, her focus betraying her as he dropped the metal at her at the last second, her eyes following the item as it fell. His body rammed into hers in a tackle that quickly turned into a grapple. Nice try, round cheeks, but it'll take more than that to take me out. The world watched as they fought tooth and nail, literally, to force the other into submission. Uraraka punched up into his ribs over and over, to the point he was fairly sure the camera nearest to the stage had picked up the sound on her cracking one. He responded in kind by breaking her nose with his forehead and doing whatever he could to keep her from standing up, which would give her a significant advantage while he was weightless. Izuku vaguely heard people yelling about various things like fairness and being nice to women, but he was far more focused on the battle, unraveling in front of him. Uraraka had finally managed to get up and free herself from the grapple and tried to throw him away from her when he latched his teeth into her arm, keeping himself from floating away. In her moment of pain and surprise, he was able to get behind her and get her into a headlock that spelled the end of the fight. But she didn't give up either. She slowly crawled to the edge of the ring, clearly hoping to throw him out of bounds in some way. She was barely 10 feet from the edge when she collapsed and tapped out, not able to hold her breath any longer as she was choked out. The match was called and both eventually stood up, Bakugo standing proudly but looking upon Oshako with respect. Both of them beat a sheet but having given their all to the fight. Izuku gulped nervously. He supposed that decided who he would be facing in the finals. Now he just had to figure out how to deal with battling his former bully on live television. Chapter 35, Izuku had thought about this fight a lot. Considered it from every angle in a way that might be considered overthinking by a reasonable person. There were so many ways to go about it, and it really depended on what he was aiming to accomplish. Victory would be easy, but most ways to win easily were what his opponent wanted. He stared across the stage as Bakugo entered the arena. What Katsuki wanted was for Izuku to go all out, to treat him as a serious opponent. The issue with this is that it would vaporize the teenager and leave Izuku with a murder charge. He couldn't just forfeit either, because while that would piss off Bakugo, Izuku refused to lose this fight. So, the more quirks he used, the more successful Bakugo would feel, but he couldn't use too few and lose. Because really, all he wanted was for Bakugo to understand him and stop being so mean all the time. And Izuku never hitting back had let him get away with it for so long, but if his dad taught him anything, it is that there's a time for patience and kindness, and there's a time to hit back. Which is how he got to his current plan. It was probably the most difficult way to go about this, but hey, that's what Plus Ultra is all about. Katsuki stood across from him on the raised platform, glaring at him as hard as possible. "Don't think you can beat me if you hold back, again. I'll kick your ass just like always, you coward." For once Izuku glared back. "If I didn't hold back, I'd vaporize half the city. I'll give you exactly the fight you don't want. A fair one." As he tried to figure out exactly what Izuku meant, Midnight called for them to get ready, raising her whip into the air. President Mick was getting the crowd amped up for the match, but neither of them were listening. The moment the whip cracked and signaled the beginning of the fight, he activated larceny and took the solid weapon from Katsuki's hands before throwing it out of bounds. "What? Afraid to fight me unless I'm quirkless and unarmed?" Instead of responding, Izuku just charged at him and threw a punch as hard as he could. The angry teen moved to the side, but it still clipped his shoulder, slightly. When all it did was push him back a bit and stung a normal amount, he looked confused at first and then angrier than ever before as he pieced together what Izuku had said. A fair fight. They would both be fighting quirkless and unarmed in a pure test of strength and skill. Bakugo had an advantage since he'd been training in quirkless combat while Izuku had started training more recently, and mostly focused on his quirks. That said, it wasn't entirely lopsided. Izuku had kept physical prime active for about a year, only switching it out when he was in a fight. It didn't really cross his mind too much since just about everything else had changed as well, but quirk-enhanced puberty had hit him like a truck. He'd grown about a foot taller in the last year and was a wall of solid muscle rather than the scrawny teen he used to be. The speed that he grew was clearly because of the quirk, but the end result would probably be pretty close to what he would have been anyways. Physical prime made it easier to get into your best possible shape and stay that way, but that didn't mean you were guaranteed to be huge. The original holder had been under 5'3". Even though his mom was pretty short, both possible biological fathers were well over 7 feet tall, so his current 6'4" stature was probably to be expected. However, Bakugo didn't care how big or strong his opponent was. He saw himself as the best and wouldn't let anyone stand in his way. He was a scrappy fighter, moving in and out, doing as much damage as he could while avoiding his opponent. Izuku took a hard hit to the gut, forcing him to exhale. It hurt, but it was also a rush. He had gotten used to fights where every attack could level a building, but keeping defenses strong enough that he barely felt it. There was something exhilarating in its simplicity. There were no clever counters or mentally taxing quirks, no quick thinking or grand plans were needed for this fight, just fists against faces. "Are you forkin' kidding? I'll kill you, you overconfident motherforker. I'll make you regret holding back all these years." Bakugo's lip was bloodied from an elbow to the face, but he returned the favor by breaking Izuku's nose with a well-timed headbutt. They fell into a rhythm, trading hits back and forth, not caring about the consequences to their bodies. "Take me seriously." A kick to a knee. "I am." A punch to the gut. "Bullshit." An open palm to the face. "Not bullshit, you're just not listening. You never have, A bite on the hand. Wait, who the fork bites during a fight? You've always looked down on me. Izuku tried to figure out how to make him understand when he remembered a quirk he had but never really had a reason to use. His next punch sent a feeling of rage and inadequacy through him as violent empathy took effect. He saw confusion flash across Bukigu's face as he accessed a bit of Izuku's emotions with every blow. More than that, he felt Katsuki's confusion when he delivered a pushing kick to Katsuki's chest. As they beat the shit out of each other on national television, they understood each other for the first time in their lives. He felt Bukigu's life as if he himself had lived it, responding to everything with anger and violence to cover up any fears, keeping people at a distance so you don't get hurt. The day you find out your quirk will never come back. Lashing out to constantly prove your own strength while everyone assumes you're weak. Rage at never knowing what you could have been with a quirk. The guidance counselors all telling you to not even try it being a hero. Always feelings lesser than those around you, always being told that you couldn't make it until spite was the only reason left sometimes. Fear and weakness and hope all shoved down and suppressed until only pride and anger showed through. And finally you see Izuku standing there, confirming that you aren't even worth the effort. That everyone was right, you are weak, you're not a serious challenge, that people feel nothing but pity for you. Izuku barely noticed when he managed to get a solid hold on his opponent and threw him over the line, ending the fight. Neither of them noticed the crowds cheering or anything Midnight was saying. They were both beaten and bloodied. He was pretty sure each of them had multiple broken bones and dislocated joints. They just stared at each other, neither knowing what the other saw inside and both on the verge of tears. They weren't born of sadness necessarily, it was the nature of the quirk, especially after using it to such an extent. Rapidly experiencing all of someone's emotions would overwhelm just about anyone to the point of tears. Izuku held out a hand with a kind smile. Katsuki stared at it skeptically for a few moments before slowly taking it. He'd always thought it was a gesture of pity, a taunt that he wasn't good enough on his own. But now he could see that maybe it wasn't a suggestion that he couldn't do it on his own, but that he shouldn't have to. Everything that he'd seen during the fight indicated it was the latter, even if that was still very foreign to him. After pulling him up onto his feet, Izuku activated hyper-regeneration and injury absorption, healing both of them completely. Bukigu just stared at him for a bit before speaking. "I'm sorry, I guess. Seeing shit from your perspective was weird as fork though." "Yeah, it was really weird for me too, it's not something that's easy to put into words. But I don't think I can accept that apology right now." Holy fork, he actually said it. It had taken a lot of lessons and self-respect to get there, but he'd finally acknowledged that he had been genuinely wronged and he didn't have to forgive someone just because they wanted him to. "Yeah, kinda figured that." He paused for a second. "Oi, the shit I saw was real, right? That wasn't all bullshit or something to trick me into not being an asshole, was it?" Yeah. It's a quirk called violent empathy. It basically yeah, the name is pretty self-explanatory, and I already saw how it works. I'm getting out of here so we can do the damn ceremony." Even though he was acting a bit jaded and aggressive still, Izuku could easily see that it was all bluster as he tried to process everything. It was only then that he realized that using the quirk in both directions meant Bukigu might have learned some things he really shouldn't know. About anything you saw that may or may not be kinda secretive. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone about your forked up family tree. But don't be such an idiot with that quirk next time. Not everyone is as nice as me, and now I know a forking more than either of us would want me to know." And with that they both went back through their respective entrances. They were immediately directed to the waiting room while they got everything set up for the awarding ceremony. Oshako and Momo had gotten there first and gave him smiles when they showed up. Araka looked exhausted but all healed up, so he could guess that she had been seen by Recovery Girl after her match. She gave him a big hug and congratulations. "That's not how I thought you were going to do that, but it was still really cool to watch. Yaozu nodded along. It was pretty impressive, if a bit violent. Even by sports festival standards. I'm just glad we can just tie for third and I don't need to do another fight. Uraraka laughed. What? You don't want me to throw you into orbit? Yes. That is in fact exactly what I don't want to happen. Besides, you're exhausted and I've used up all my reserves, so I doubt it would be a good match either way. Izuku loved being friends with Uraraka, but she was a bit battle-hungry at times. She was very kind and bubbly, but also seemed like the kind of person that would help you bury a body no questions asked. After a couple of minutes the PA system in the room called them back to the field. They were met partway, by Midnight who led them to the winner podiums. The crowds went wild as the four of them walked to the center of the arena, which had been modified by Shemendos. Alright everyone. We've seen some amazing work from all of our students today, but these four really went plus ultra. And handing out the medals is a new teacher at UP, but you know him better as the reigning #1 hero. All right. Before she finished, the man himself slammed into the ground. I am here to give the awards. Over the speakers the audience heard a resigned and concerned, "Ah, sheet," from the two commentators in the booth above. At the moment, everyone was too distracted by All Might and probably thought it was unrelated, but it wouldn't take too long for them to realize why they had swore. Haha, I only just returned from my mission abroad, but I couldn't miss this chance to be a part of congratulating these fine students for their accomplishments. Izuku was doing his best not to react. He'd had a good day, he got to be part of the sports festival and seemed to have resolved things with Katsuki, and he didn't want to let that bumbling fool potentially ruin it. He approached Yaozu and Uraraka, who were standing on the third place section, and both were a bit nervous since they knew that Izuku had a bad history with the man even though they didn't know why. You both fought valiantly today and showed your impressive abilities to everyone here. The world is lucky to have heroes like you to help lead the next generation. He then moved over to Bukigu, frowning slightly as he clearly thought something over. You did quite well for someone without a quirk. While your drive is commendable, young man, I would warn you to be careful on this path. Being a hero is dangerous work even with a quirk, and there are many other good fork off and choke on a bag of dicks. Haha. Such vigor from the youth these days. And then he moved on to the final student, holding out the golden medal to Izuku. I've had a moment to think about some things that you and your mother have said to me. And I'd like to apologize for not being there for you when I should have. Izuku was already seething at him, wondering why the hell he was bringing this up in public, let alone while live cameras were aimed at them. The three other winners and Midnight could all see Izuku's expression and decided they didn't want to be in the vicinity, blast zone, for when things turned for the worse. If I want to prove that I'm going to support you from now on and be in your lives again, I can't keep you as some dirty secret. Besides, you've more than proven you can keep yourself safe. So, I just want to say, he gave a signature huge smile and put a hand on Izuku's shoulder. I'm proud of you, son. The entire stadium went dead silent at those words, then quickly regained their voices when the #1 hero went flying backwards, slamming into the edge of the arena and leaving a hole in the steel barrier where he landed. Izuku's body shifted back from the brief change he'd undergone, the brightly colored shell of a mantis shrimp wrapped in dense exterior muscles. The shockwave from the supersonic punch had damaged pretty much all the sound. The brightly colored shell of a mantis shrimp wrapped in dense exterior muscles. The shockwave from the supersonic punch had damaged pretty much all the sound equipment, but one still picked up the mutter, "True punch." Author's notes: Wowzers, this was a fun and intense chapter to write. I thought this would be a more interesting way to go about the Katsuki redemption arc by literally punching empathy into him. Also, in case you're curious, True Punch is mantis shrimp, muscle augmentation, physical enhancement, and strong arm. And that's the end of this part. Great, now we have to wait next part to see how this goes.